Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Andreas with Grace Healing. Welcome, everyone. And I have with me again today Debbie and Larry, Deborah and Larry. How are you doing today?
Very well, very well. And you?
Fantastic.
Wonderful. It's been an amazing couple of weeks, and it's wonderful to connect again and get together and see how Andreas leads us in this process. So
Yeah, awesome. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today and for what, in my opinion, promises to be a fascinating exploration of spiritual experiences. And throughout history, there's so many spiritual leaders that have shared profound moments when they felt that they heard the voice of God or received some kind of a divine vision. And these experiences, voices, seeing visions, and also sensing vibrations, are often described as deeply personal encounters. We even see that in the Bible. But what do these experiences really mean? That's what we want to explore. Are they unique to just a chosen few, or are they all available to all of us? And we just have forgotten how to tap in. So today we'll dive into these themes, and we call it voices, visions, and vibrations. Okay, that's kind of like the topic we want to talk about. And we'll explore how the spiritual leaders interpret this phenomenon and how we can maybe find a new way to interpret it. We also touch on the intriguing idea that everything in the universe vibrates at a certain frequency that may tie in that same topic. So as we begin this conversation, I'd like to ask the two of you, how do you personally experience divine communication? Have you ever felt that God speaks directly to you through a voice, a vision, or some kind of a feeling or subtle vibration in your surroundings? Whoever wants to go first.
go right ahead, Deborah.
Okay. Yes, I definitely feel and know that God communicates with me. I've heard in my spirit, but it hasn't been audible. It's just a strong sense, a strong knowing. A thought comes to me. I can give an example from many years ago. My baby was in a playpen downstairs. I was upstairs, and all of a sudden, I had this thought in my head that I heard without it being audible, go get the baby. And it was so urgent. And I had a vision also of the house filled with smoke. And I hated. I went down and picked up the baby, and not much longer after that, all of a sudden, I'm upstairs again. I saw soot flying in the air. A kerosene heater in the downstairs had caught fire and filled the whole downstairs. You couldn't see the landing. So God spoke to me to spare that life. And I know, I sense guidance, the presence, no audible voice. It's not like I hear a voice from outside of me, but just like I'll get a thought, how we'll think something. Well, a thought comes, but I know it's not me. And I then can choose to act on it or receive it. Just the other night, I sensed the presence of God, but the immensity of our God. And actually, Larry and I were praying at the time on the phone, and I know that is what I experienced. And I could, I've probably my whole lifetime, I have many, many experiences, but that's just a couple of.
Larry.
Well, in that, I would say that like one of the things that Deborah describes is the importance between the awareness that it's a spoken verbal voice and a sense of knowing that it's the presence of God that has instilled this understanding within us. whether prior to our arrival here and it rises, but taking great care not to recognize it as a specific voice. And then the same way with the vision or the intuitive awareness to be moved can be measured. And the fact is, did it measure and bring forth blessing? Did it govern a person through fear, or did it govern them in empowerment? She was empowered to go to the baby immediately. She wasn't running in fear and frantic. It was a knowing to move with absolute clarity and spiritual fortitude.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I would say in my experience, my own personal ground of like knowing the presence of God through communications and visions and experiences, is I would say that I've had an advantage in the fact that I've been gifted this opportunity in my life to serve tens of thousands of people. That has thrust me into a ground of being more practiced in looking for God, not the answers. And what it's done is it's permitted me to witness things of a visionary or spiritual nature. Like, for instance, I had prayed over one woman that was suffering with a disease very similar to Lou Gehrig's disease. And I witnessed 3 different spirits of rape and then a generational spirit of rape released from her. And I saw their forms leave and everything. And this woman hadn't walked for 2 years, but after the prayer and after the covering, and there were many other spirits as well released, but I was gifted by God opening my spiritual sight to see what was unfolding, was not just the awareness of God's presence and what he was accomplishing, but the physical image of these spirits rising and leaving the room. And then a knowing rose within me to name them as the spirit of rape transmutes into a holy and divine light and is restored into new life. So there is this recognition of both the visionary aspect of it and then the knowing of what came from it. It wasn't like God saying, this is the spirit of rape by voice. It was a knowing that, oh, wait a minute. And then I knew it was tied to her and the 3 rapes. And then I knew that the generational rape, the high spirit of rape, was tied to 3 generations before and great-grandmother. It was a knowing. It wasn't like a verbal speak. It was just this knowing that transpired in the moment of its revelation.
But if you take a step back, I'm just wondering, science might say it's hallucination. It's like maybe if somebody took, what is it called? Ayahuasca or whatever it's called. Some of these
ayahuasca medication. Yeah, ayahuasca. Yeah.
You have a broader consciousness, and you have a different understanding beyond the reality that we live in day by day. So where is the certainty that oh, this is God's truth coming through?
Well, in that case, like the one I just described, it was measurable by the fruit. In the fact that the woman hadn't walked for 2 years, she was facing muscle atrophy. She was shut down to the point where her body was basically at the end of its life. And that's why the family flew her up to Maine for me to pray over her, because they had just given up. There was no medical answer. There was no nothing. And they knew she was done in a very short period of time. Let's just try this one last resort. Well, for her to sit up, first of all, that was totally new. Her to sit up under her own power, spin on the table, let her legs hang over the edge. She's smiling from ear to ear, but crying with tears pouring down her face, and stood up and walked around the room. And then asked, can we go down to the beach? I want to walk on the beach. Now, here's a woman that hadn't walked in 2 years, now is walking in the sand with me as we're decompressing and sharing the experience of what happened to her. And I went through the different description of the spirit. Oh, she's, well, yeah, I was raped 3 times in college. Well, yeah, my great-great-grandmother was raped, and then she was cast out of the church because she was the one that became pregnant. And so there was this verification of the things that I was gifted the opportunity to see explained by her story. And it supported the nature of God, not just a collective, like, what'd you call it? Delusion or whatever. And one of the things that I would suggest to people at this point, because you kind of like leapt into that whole expression of like the ayahuasca, is I tell people to take great care. There are people out there doing microdosing. There are people out there taking massive doses of THC. There are people out there doing ayahuasca or a mescaline or different things like that. In my walk, I've found the purity of no alteration of the mind is the quicker path to the realization of enlightenment in God. To alter the mind presents you the opportunity to start hearing spiritual voices that you think are God, because you're inserting yourself in the spirit realm and actually opening up for dialogue with things that have one desire: to manifest their existence within you and to take your attention from the divine. That's when the voices present. Would you say, Deb?
Yes, I totally agree. Totally. That I just want to say that to recognize that it's God speaking, we need to know God.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have that intimate connection be developing. It's like, we're friends. The three of us are friends. And the more time that we connect with one another, we get to know what we like, how we think, different things. And so then if someone told me something about Larry, well, I would be able to measure it by what I know.
Mm-hmm.
And so the same thing, I've been talking with God many years, but it had to develop because I, my own self, would have thoughts that sounded good to me. Well, maybe they were God, but I couldn't be sure. But now I do know. And there's time I could be walking down the street and I see somebody and I get a knowing that I need to lift them up in prayer, even though I will never speak to them. I will never know, but I'm not concerned about that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just interested in heeding the prompting that I hear.
And this
It's
is
not about results for me, but
right. And this is
yeah,
probably, Deborah, because you have had that, I don't want to say lifestyle, but that communication with God or that closeness to God for many, many years, right? But how about the people that are seeking and that are hearing about all these miracles that happen? I call it miracles, right? Larry, what you described with that sick patient that was ill
Yep.
and was healed, they consider this a miracle. And most people would then reach out to God and say, please give me a miracle too, speak to me, help me. So I want to look at it from a seeking point of view, people that haven't experienced it yet, but they hear it all the time. I mean, they hear these pastors, that always
yeah,
proclaim, I heard God told me to say this and that and the other thing,
yeah.
but they don't have that experience. So what does it take to train ourselves maybe to be at that level that we are open to?
Well, okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
I just thinking back to my own experience. I, I encountered love. I encountered God. I always had a sense of awareness that there was a God, but I had that encounter and I fell in love with love and I wanted more. And God honors that heart that really wants God, not the results, because if we're seeking God because we want to have some miracle, we're cheating ourselves. We're certainly cheating God also because it's about relationship. So God protected me from getting drawn into a cult early on. They sounded good. They sounded really good. It sounded like, oh, what did I know? I didn't know much of anything except that I loved God and God loved me. And yet I was protected because the Lord looks at our hearts.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a pure heart that, none of us are going to be like 100% 24/7 seeking God. But, just like David in the Old Testament, he had a heart after God. Did he mess up a lot? Yeah. But God saw his heart and led him step by step. And that's what I encourage others is seek God. Seek God. Don't seek some miracle you see or not. But if you see something that somebody credited to God and it's good and honorable, praise God. Give him the credit for it, but don't get drawn into that. Get drawn to God. We all work with many people, and for myself, I just want to be used to point to God, not so people are starting to follow Debbie,
Mhm.
And so that's a heed too. Who's getting the glory here? Who's getting the credit for this? And is this deepening your relationship with the living God?
Exactly.
It's a searching of the heart. What do you really want? Do you want God, or you just want to have these extra blessings so you can live your life the way you want, which is never going to be as great as whatever God would have for you if you seek him first.
Exactly. And I want to just support Deborah in the fact that it really is a relational thing. It is about becoming familiar, not with your experiences of life, but familiar with God first. And we've shared this before in other videos, to become God first nature, not second nature. Because some people say, I want to learn to pray second nature. It's like they want to do a memory thing.
Mhm.
It is about deepening and becoming more aware of the interpersonal union that you are extended every single breath that you receive.
Yeah.
It's something that God has established by grace, that if you just call upon my name and seek me, I am with you and I have named you friend. And so if we start to look upon that and say, how deep is it that is God within me? That God's love transcends every fault, every flaw. God's love is perfect and without price. God turns around and looks at you and says, the love comes without you paying a price. All you have to do is look to me and reach to me. And within that, what I've witnessed is, especially today's culture, there's so much going on with like the gurus and the mystics and the teachers of today, where they're talking about this process of continually forming an intention or manifesting a certain result. And in my process, I'd suggest in all humility that if we would seek first into the living presence of God, we would find that the higher intention is already formed within the union we hold with God, and we begin to be spoken through us. We would find different words if we approach God first, deepen in our union with God, and the familiarity of God and the knowings that were breathed into us when we were first created. Because that's when I believe that God spoke. God spoke in the beginning of all creation, manifested vibrational awareness and access to limitless knowledge within us. We have veiled that and clustered it with the voices of others, earthly voices, spiritual voices, demonic voices, angelic voices. We have altered the purity of the original instruction that brings the highest gain. However, if we do like Deborah says, we would find that personal and holy union with God. And then we would know that, ooh, what I heard in that message last night through that vision or that dream, in that voice, it began in truth, gained my attention, and then it fell away from truth. It was a distractor. It led me away from the presence of the divine so that it might manifest its presence within me, that I would give it permission to exist and reside within me. And it might rise as the spirit of knowledge and wisdom, but then all of a sudden it becomes anxiety and discomfort about something I'm about to face in my life. But I think that this spiritual counselor is going to help me through it, even though I'm resulting in anxiety instead of a woman walking on the beach that hadn't walked for 2 years. I'm not showing a measurable fruit that manifests God's living attributes in me. But if I know God personally, I would know the attributes that would describe God. with
Yes.
spiritual fortitude, clarity, wisdom, discernment, peace, and ever-present joy even when I'm surrounded by suffering. The ability to bring grace into a moment of distress. That is the fruit that would show me that I'm moving within the knowing of God instead of the voice of some distractor.
It's interesting. I have a note here from a religious perspective, which kind of underlines what you just said, where it says divine communication is continuous and requires no intermediary. So it's a direct communication, right? And God's ideas are always transmitted to humanity, but recognizing this communication depends on spiritual awareness. Some Christian traditions suggest that divine communication is a blessing for those in alignment with God's will. Now, when I read this the first time, I was thinking, as a Catholic, that came up as a Catholic, it says, well, if you're not a Catholic, then you're not aligned with God, right? So you can't receive the gift of God. That was my first thing when I read this. But in essence, what this line says is what you just said, Larry. It's that
Yes.
direct connection that we have. And you know what I also find is often most human beings that may not have that deep relationship with God yet, need a sign. And for some of them, it means they have to hit bottom. They do stupid things until all of a sudden their eyes open. And sometimes it's totally unexpected. If we talk about visions, I want to share just a quick story how I had a vision which was totally unexpected. My wife and I were moving from into our house that we just finished building from our rental. And in the evening, I returned my rental truck and went to the gas station to fill it up before I returned it. And all of a sudden, there is a guy there, young guy, long black hair with a bike, and said, "Hey, can you give me a ride, please, to the next town?" And said, "Yeah, I can do that." He sat in the car with me, and as we drove, I asked him, "What's your name?" And he said, "Elijah." And that's a kind of interesting name. So he had a bandage around his ankle. I said, "So what happened here?" He said, "Well, I got hurt." And I said, "So where are you going?" He said, "I don't know yet. I'm trying to find my direction in life." So we're driving down the road just for 2, 3 miles. And then I said, "Well, I have to return my truck here. Can I let you out here?" I gave him some money so he can get food. I got his bike out from the back from the load thing, and I turned around and he was gone. Now it occurred to me only a few days later. I thought, "What was this? This is strange. It's impossible that he could have disappeared." To me, this was a vision, a message that came to me, very simple. And I kind of looked up what Elijah, what's the significance of Elijah in a biblical context, and I saw that he basically paved the way for Joshua, and he was a prophet that was seeking the truth and seeking directions, and that's what he told. So to me, this was a vision, but it wasn't hallucination. It wasn't. I know it was something that could have been a vision that was given to me and gave me some direction in my life. So things like that can happen. It was beautiful.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That reminds me of when I was a little girl, before I was 8 years old, I remember in a home so it had to be between when I was 4 and 8. I would wake up, or I think I'm awake anyway, and there was always somebody sitting at the end of my bed, someone that loved me very much. And, nobody had come in my room and nobody knew who that was. But I knew, I knew it was just the messenger reassuring me that I was loved. And I really needed that because there was a lot of chaos in my childhood home. So,
Yeah, and
go ahead.
No, go ahead. If you finish your thought, Larry.
One of the things that's fascinating is children are still attuned to the presence of God, more so than adults. And then they're taught away from that. So that was a natural state of being with you. It's kind of like if you watch animals. Animals will walk through a room and then all of a sudden they'll look in a certain direction. There's something of a spiritual nature unfolding there, but the human is not attuned to it. The animal picks up on it instantly. Same way with a child. A child sitting there blabbing away, talking to something, and they don't know from a earthly standpoint that the adult doesn't know it's there because they've tuned their mind out to it. They've been
Yeah, yeah.
educated away from the fact that there's more than just what you see physically going on here.
Mhm.
And that's my concern for people, is to remember that, yes, what you see on the earth plane is something of the physical nature, but that's only providing 5 sentences, and it's not even allowing or accounting for the fact and limitless nature of God and the limitless nature of creation. It dismisses probably 99.9% of creation if you're only going to focus on the physical
Yeah.
visual aspects of it. So,
But sometimes these visual aspects and manifestations are so big. I mean, I'm thinking of Lourdes, Lourdes in France, where people go and then they go into the waters there, pray, and then they come
mhm,
out healthy. Or Medjugorje, and I think it's Croatia, I forget where it is, where these girls appeared in front of the masses for years
mhm,
and
yep.
predicted and talked, and hundreds of thousands of people have seen this. So what is that all about? I mean, that's
But
very.
again, I believe that now, personally, I don't discount any of those things. I have witnessed things myself, but what I've done is I've developed a practice that even when I witness things in front of me, I look directly to my personal union with God first, then discern the nature of what they may be saying to me.
Mhm.
So I don't offer, like if I'm sitting there and say the girls of Lords appear, I don't dialogue with them. I embrace my union with God first and witness what they reveal to others. Because then what I see is that I've seen this in other situations, like when I was dealing with people that were running like Discovery Ghost shows and stuff like this. I would see things of a spiritual apparition, or I was blessing homes up in Bristol, Maine, where 8 different properties where I was blessing homes and getting rid of ghosts and stuff. And I would see things that were divine and benevolent in the nature of God's presence. But the minute vocal frequencies came in, vocal vibrational things, I knew it. It was spiritual and it was demonic. And I would not give them any time. I would center my focus upon the one thing that is God's return, and they would leave instantly. They would no longer have power to hold bound in that place.
Mhm.
And the families that were witnessing these prayers unfolding and watching the changes in their properties were like, they sensed and knew the normal cold feeling they had, or the see the little girl that came walking out into the hallway that walked the same loop over and over and then squatted down in the corner, and she was a ghostly apparition, but she was the spirit of fear, not the child that once walked in that form. It was the fear that was known in that child that didn't know what to do while it was in fear, fearing the nature of how its parents were being treated. So that spirit of fear was present, not the child in ghostly form. But by seeking God, I was able to see that. If I had sought the child, I would have given the demonic within that realm, that spiritual form that had governed that child while it was present on this planet, and I would have given it time and I would have held it bound here. I would have held it captive to my desires to be seen as somebody who could change things. Instead, I chose God, and in choosing God, it didn't have the power to reside and it was gone. And we moved on to the next house.
That makes me think. I live in Savannah, Georgia, right? Deborah, you just came to visit.
Yeah, yeah,
Is very haunted. They
yeah.
have tours upon tours, and there are societies, the paranormal societies, that are going there with microphones and and trying to capture these voices and stuff going on in these old houses all around the city. And that's kind of interesting phenomenon, isn't it? I mean, humans are trying to. Is it curiosity? Is it just, is it a playfulness? What is it? But what we're doing actually is we're holding these spirits back, right? Instead of helping.
Yes, we are. We are. For our own personal gain or to
Yeah.
support the story. Now, there is an innocence in an approach to encounter things of a spiritual nature. But in my heart, I trust God more than my own perception.
Yeah.
So I would rather surrender and say, Yahweh, All that I witness comes before you. I release my ties and tendrils upon it, that it would return into your loving embrace and pour back according to your design and not my own. So I don't wish to be elevated by its presence, trapped between a spiritual state of being or locked into a state that it has not been able to break from for over 100 years or whatever is going on. To it, it holds no reference of time. It only knows that it's in this causal loop. That's like most people don't understand. When they see things of a ghostly nature, it's always this causal loop. So like that little girl that came out in the ghost that I witnessed, she was the spirit of fear, anxiety. And that spirit of fear actually only knew that little parade of that child up on the landing of this second floor, walking between the bedrooms and then squatting down and just leaning against the wall like this between the two doors. That causal loop was because it could not embody the full life and breadth of the child, because as the spirit of fear, it only knew itself as fear and only embodied itself in that child as fear. So it couldn't reach into the joyful moments and expressions of the child. It couldn't reach into the celebration of simplicity of eating a meal and walk down the stairs and go eat dinner. That spirit that happened to emerge in that moment was only known as it knew itself within the human form. So when we come to something that's like going on, whether it's the Discovery Channel doing ghost TV shows, or Georgia doing tours around ghosts and apparitions, are we honestly seeking the highest gain for the spirits involved in this process, or are we utilizing them for our own personal gain?
Entertainment, yeah.
Exactly. I'd ask that question.
Yeah, a passage in Acts 16 came to mind because I was thinking everything. We're putting God first. We're seeking God. Then we want everything to return to God and to be focused on God, not to our gain. And in Acts 16, Paul and his entourage were working their way through a town. I don't remember which town, but anyway, they came across this girl, and she was prophesying and saying that they served the great God, and whatever. And her owner was making money on her.
Yep.
So Paul looked and said, this is not bringing glory to God. Yeah, she's proclaiming us as servants of God, but that wasn't going to be what got people's attention. It was going to be, whoa, we're impressed with her, not looking at God. So he lifted everything up to the living God, and those spirits left her. Her owner was not pleased, but it was either for man's will or God's will.
Agreed.
For man's glory or God's glory. And something that came to mind, how when we're in tune with God, we now make ourselves available to be used however. And there's been many times. And one example, I like to walk. I walked out of my home, and it actually was during the pandemic. And in my mind, I'm thinking that at the end of the street, I go left, I turned right. Okay, I guess I'm going to the right. I didn't say, oh, what do you think? I just went. Now I'm going down, and then I thought again that I was going to be taking a left. I ended up right. And I walked through my town until I got to the river. And as I was coming up on the river, there were picnic tables along there. And there was a young man sitting there. And at first I thought, oh, he's writing. He's a college student. He's doing studies or whatever. Well, as I came around the front of his table, our eyes met, and we ended up speaking for an hour about the living God. He was actually writing a screenplay.
Awesome.
He's a little older than college age. And it was a divine appointment. But it's because of recognizing, it wasn't even like, oh, God is leading me, but I just could go with the flow. I knew that it wasn't, I can be spacey and just totally forget where I'm going or whatever. Been that way my whole life. I don't know. But, you know, in this case and many other cases, I just find myself somewhere that was not my intent, but I see it as a divine appointment. And that too is God leading, in so many ways. And that brings greater joy than trying to harness that power.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And this is beautiful, Deborah, and it makes me think of what we can transition into the last part, which is vibrations and frequencies.
Yes.
When two people meet and then they have a meaningful conversation, they are at the same level of vibration or frequency.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the scientific studies of sound and quantum physics and all that, we learn that everything is based on frequency. There's a God frequency, maybe there's a human frequency. And Larry, you often talk about this, make that comparison of being at 100 or at 1,000. I forget,
Yep.
that this makes a difference. So can we talk about that a little bit? Obviously, I know that frequency and sound. Lately, I've been very interested in sound and sound therapy and learning about that and experiencing
Yep.
also when I listen to Tibetan bowls or some even the tuning forks, and that you can feel and hear that vibration through your ears, that it feels very good and very healing.
Mm-hmm.
So
And even beyond that, into like the celestial gongs and the different
yeah,
things that they do with different types of instruments that they use to bring forth different vibrational tones. Yeah.
yeah. So have you, Larry, have you had experience with that in that area? And because I know you and I had a lot of discussions about quantum physics and the new scientific findings as well.
Oh,
But
yes.
as it relates to sound, what can you share?
Well,
And
one of the most, oh, go ahead.
and also, God's name, Yahweh and Avun, of course.
Exactly. There's a reality to that. And like some people don't understand, like when this was like in my experience, I had hit a wall of just dying to self. I did not know the names Yeshua, Yahweh, Elohim. I did not know those names. I cried out to God at a time in my life. This is now like 20 plus years ago or whatever, maybe more like 30 years ago, actually, 35 years ago. And I just broke because I did not like what I was seeing in the world and the way they described the God that I believed God was. I did not believe that what they were describing to me of Yeshua was as Yeshua is, when they were describing this Jesus character that they were using as an instrument to justify their willingness in war, to justify their dominance over another individual group or race or whatever. And I was like, there's something wrong here. And in my crying out to God, I started letting go of everything I thought I knew, everything I had been taught to the church, everything I'd been taught through different healing events that I had been a part of and all this stuff. And I was just letting go of everything. And I felt myself breaking, just completely breaking down and things being rended out of me, ripped out, torn out. But it was by my resistance of letting go that the ripping and the rending was occurring. I came to this place where I went into total emptiness and I felt and knew God's presence as me as the one thing. And I knew this vibrational expression of Yahweh Elohim Ileni Luatata, Yeshua Avadle, Abun Savayana. And when I recognized the word Abun, it brought me to the remembrance of when I was younger as a child. I used to remember that the Our Father was not truth, the way that we were given the Our Father prayer. And I remembered certain things, and I came back to this awareness. Now, I had never been taught Aramaic. I was never taught these things, but there was a reality to Yahweh and Yahshua, the living vibrational frequency of the Spirit of God in Yah. Then Yahweh, the noun form of embodying God's presence within me. Then Yahshua, the evidence of God made known through the living word upon my tongue. Abun, the living breath that resides within me. And I started to discover these frequency tones within me. And then I started finding that as I was serving people, when I was praying over people, different tones and frequencies would come through me in multiple languages. And I'm talking about earthly languages, heavenly languages, and universal languages. And then it's like I'm sitting there praying, and one day I'm praying over a group, and I hear one prayer come out, and one person hears it in Czechoslovakian, and the other person hears it in Japanese, and the other person hears it in Aramaic. So I had to recognize that God holds clarity of the nature of how he wishes to reach that person from within the frequency that it is expressed upon my tongue, but not my tongue, but how they receive it. It's not just what frequency is given, it's what frequency is received. And that's why I realized it wasn't just about how I could wield some magic expression of expressing a healing into a moment. It was about how could I discover God and reveal God's presence both within myself and within another. Sometimes I've seen group settings where they've done that through either celestial gongs or, like you described, the Tibetan bowls, where they cycle around the bowl and bring a tone up, and they increase the tone and increase the tone and increase the tone, and then they allow it to just settle and fall away. The Dalai Lama would speak tones over some of the world leaders that would ask him to come and pray over him. And he'd be on the and reaching deep into a specific region of that person's body as spiritually led to bring a frequency that would stir and relinquish a parasite from within their bodies that somebody thought was cancer, but it was a parasite. And then the person's all of a sudden get up and jump. Oh my God, I got to have a bowel movement. They run off and they do a bowel movement. They pass, and all of a sudden they're not having problems anymore. And there was like a king that he did it over where they prayed over him for like 5 days or 7 days in specific tones that he was given by God to speak over this person. And at the end of the 7 days, that individual was healed from the nature of what they were going through. So there is a reality to the nature that we are first spirit in nature. We are manifesting on a certain tone of frequency that stacks up this human form.
Yep.
That we could visibly see and take the light form that we are and put a physical expression to it. In my instruction, my understanding, I found that even I could give you like one of my daily, like I say this out loud to myself each and every day. Yahweh Elohim, I am fully aligned with the nature and reality of your presence within me prior to the formation and manifestation of your DNA. I mean, of my DNA. Your presence be known within the fullness of my existence. And I speak that out loud. For I want God's manifestation of my design, not earthly influence by the vibrational frequencies that I've heard people talking my whole life about when you get old. Me receiving these lesser frequencies into my frame of reference. Somebody going through surgery. In surgery, they're knocked out cold, but their hearing and mind are still open. And in the surgical unit, they're speaking over them. They're speaking lesser words. They're programming into this vessel something the person doesn't even know they're receiving. Somebody else has lived and dwelled with a heart of a certain measure within their lives. They function at a certain frequency of love-centered, heart-centered thought process. They now take that heart and transplant it in somebody else, and now that person starts to behave like that person. There are wives that have complained about husbands that have gone through heart surgery that are all of a sudden complaining that he's just as arrogant as the doctor was. Because of the transmutation of the vibrational frequency that was contacted upon the physical vessel of the heart as this doctor was handling it in a spirit of arrogance. I have the power over life. So he's implanting frequency, tone of nature, function, and reality into this vessel, then putting it in a human form, and they show up at home, and the wife is like, I can almost be sitting in the office talking to the doctor. He dismisses me. He's arrogant. He's not paying attention to me. It's not who my husband was. What happened to my husband? It happens frequently. So when we get into tools that we use, what type of frequencies are we seeking? Are we seeking an open vessel that is quantum in its expression, but open to all forms, including spiritual influence? Are we going into quantum biofeedback without first aligning ourselves with the nature of God's presence to receive only that which God intends and shed that which is not of God? Because quantum is not limited to spiritual dimensions. Quantum transcends them all. So again, we come back to Deborah's level of confidence, seek God first.
Yeah.
So even when you're going to receive biofeedback, or you're going to receive a Healy treatment, or you're going to receive a vibe treatment, or you're going to a celestial gong meditation, or Tibetan bowls, or Tibetan meditations, or transcendental meditations, go first unto God, then seek the practice. That's just my thoughts.
Wow. I agree. And I'm underlining what you just said, because God is pure, God is love, God is perfection.
And accessible.
Yes, and accessible. And so when we put God first, when we seek God, then we have the opportunity to be elevated above what we could ever attain on our own. And to seek anything without God and putting God, for me, it was always, I want to honor you. I want to reflect you in all I do. And so wherever I go, and I don't go anywhere in fear, I go in confidence because I've committed it to God.
Yep.
And then I can go and receive what I'm supposed to receive, and everything else passes me by. But if I don't do that, then I'm open myself, and I can be tossed around, and your spirit gets, your vibrations are lowered,
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
And that's the other key, like the transverse, Andreas, that people can walk into the room and feel the descent of vibrational frequency. They can feel something's off. That in itself proves the reality of frequency having impact. If you see somebody in deep distress, you sense and feel it before you have the understanding of what's transpired. So you are an antenna. You are a transmitter in the fact that you're able to receive and transmit in return. And again, I would still say that even if the TV show is going to be presented to me, the TV tube, I would rather surrender into God to say, okay, what are the words of life that can be spoken back into the situation? I'm not going to come to this person in the spirit of sympathy. I would rather listen to the needs of their heart and what's going on within them, and search the presence of the divine to know the words of encouragement that I could bring them instead of joining them in the suffering.
Yeah.
So instead of being drawn down into the frequency state, I would rather choose the highest state of being, go to God first, and let God elevate my response to the situation to increase them and draw them out of the abyss.
Yeah.
God is also frequency, right? The knowing God is at the highest frequency, wouldn't you say? You could describe.
That's something, I question that sometimes, because I feel like God is above, beyond, and transcendent of frequency. Yet God manifests all measure of frequency. And God's measure of frequency is all the highest tone of frequency. It is once it enters the physical realm of observation, or the dimensional realm of skewing it, that you start to see frequency in different form by our observation. Yet God expressed the highest frequency from that of no frequency. God expressed that of universe of that with no universe. God expressed dimension of that with no dimension. So God is that which transcends all understanding. And like we've talked about this before, this universe is merely like a cell within God. That's how vast and expansive God is. But we lose sight of that. And we think of God, well, God is the universe. God is the earth. God is the plants. God is no, God is beyond that. The whole universal experience that we have witnessed with the JWST, all the different things with the James Webb Telescope and all the different things like that, that is merely we us from within the cell, realizing that there is a massive cell in the presence of God as God, but we have no understanding of the limitations, which there are none in God. Therefore, there are multiple cells. There are multiple expressions. There are multiple dimensions, like what you experienced with that gentleman in the vehicle, in the truck. All of a sudden, he's gone. What if that was a dimensional experience?
Mhm.
What if he was there beside you in this dimension, yet the other dimension, he was not beside you? So that expands people into the importance of, okay, well, this is getting beyond my understanding. No, it's not
Yeah.
beyond God's.
Yeah.
If we deepen our awareness of God within us, we find that this does not overwhelm us. If we find that the government is imposing certain emotional intentions or certain feelings that are coming forth, like they were just admitting in the Pentagon in the interviews that they were having in Congress, talking about how they have the ability to implant thoughts in voice. They can actually put a voice into in this 5G method. They've known it. And again, they've been using this since the 1950s. So this was my concern about this whole dialogue that we were sharing, was to help people don't be in fear.
Right.
Go to God first and remember that God knows the nature and form of creation. And God knows that mankind and the spirit realm will use voice to manipulate. Therefore, in my understanding, God does not use voice, and neither does Yeshua. They present in the form of a knowing and a peaceful recognition that, oh, there's my origin. You will know that this was where I originated from, and you will return to. And you don't get distracted and sidetracked by those that are not speaking with the highest of integrity. That as you encounter less than benevolent beings, you start to recognize them for what they are, that they're a distraction. They're taking me from the central focus that is God within my life and God within others. That's just my perspective.
Let me summarize. May I try?
Give it a go. I'd like to see you do that. I want to watch that.
No, it's mind-boggling. I mean, there's so much stuff to talk about and think about, and we always come back to the same conclusions at the end, and that's God first. But what you just talked about made me think that us humans are too word-centric.
Mhm.
We always think we need to express everything in words to be understood.
Mhm.
And, if I think about even a relationship, one-to-one relationship, if somebody's grieving, for example, lost somebody, and I want to go and be with that person, we always think, oh, what should I say? What can I say? But we don't need to say anything. We can just be
Right.
there, let the words fall away, and then be in a frequency, that's how I see it, that would bring us together so that I can help that person.
Mhm.
But further on, to summarize, according to my notes here, is so it comes down really to shifting our focus from the mind to the heart. Okay, so again, being word-centric and meaning we are co-creators, which we are not. We are merely co-relevators. I think that's the word you use.
Revelators.
Well, yeah, whatever. Yeah, exactly. We help reveal the truth, right? And the
Yes,
reality.
Yeah.
exactly.
We're not
Yep.
creating it because God created it already. So that
Yes.
behooves us to really connect with Yahweh and have that direct connection, and realizing that we are one with God, that God resides within us. So also frequency, and I'm always interested in the scientific part of the discussion as it comes to frequency, and I listen to so many podcasts where they talk about this, with the new findings that
Well, I
come.
think you shared one with me from Greg Braden, where he took the mathematic aspect of what's in the DNA and it says Yahweh.
Yeah,
When
exactly.
you look to it, the numbers within the structure of the DNA and the binders of the DNA actually make the tone of the alphabet that is Yahweh.
Yeah.
And that was before they knew about the DNA structure of the human form.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah.
pretty
So
cool.
It is, and there's so much more that will be revealed and that we will know, I'm sure, in the next few years. But I think for, finally, I think we have an awesome responsibility. And responsibility meaning being able to respond, right? That's responsibility.
Yes.
Like you said, Larry, it's not about only giving frequency, but also receiving it, being open to receive it. It's a two-way street. And many of us are trapped still in not knowing how to receive. We only give
Yes.
through work,
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
commands, or through, wow, this is like how it has to be, instead of being quiet, being open, and learn how to receive the
Yep.
frequencies, the messages, the visions that are real, and understand them. So that's my summarization. So any parting words before we wrap it up from you too?
Go for it, Deborah.
Well, if we truly want to hear from God, if we want to see and be led, we need to seek God. Seek God, measure everything from that place, and you'll be on a grand adventure. That's for
Yes.
sure.
Larry?
And I want to go back to like when you were talking about frequency, for people to recognize that this was not by happenstance, that God established and instilled the living name of his presence within us. However, by mankind's blindness, there were those that wished to control that, and they removed the living name of God from the Bible, from almost all scripture, because it used to say, Yahweh Elohim, that is my name. I am that I am. Call upon my name anytime you are in need of distress. That was an instruction for how to deepen in what Deborah describes about seeking God first, drawing into God's presence, come to know God, come to recognize yourself named as friend by God. So the reality is connecting to that vibrational frequency that is Yahweh Elohim. And again, when I heard it, I know it's written Yahweh, but I keep getting the sense that there's this, because God made it simpler. It wasn't like a where I had to use my whole mouth and a there was a Yahweh. And what's happened is I prayed over people as they are being birthed into new life. And I've heard in their tone, as they express the last breath. They couldn't have said "wuh" as in way, Yahweh, but they were able to say Yahweh. And they didn't even know the language on their earthly realm. It was in their birth into new life that all of a sudden they spoke the name. So again, the reality is God has left us so many hints pointing to the very answer that's not hidden on a mountain to Tibet. It's not hidden within a church sanctuary. It's not hidden within a certain fraternal body. It's presented within you in its fullness. And you can return to the understanding and the knowing of God's holy instruction in you, and then see it confirmed through your lives. But I would ask that you might consider the importance of becoming practiced in calling upon the living name of God. And then remember that as you know him in Jesus, Yahshua's name was born of Yahweh's name. Yahweh, Yahshua. And Yahshua literally means Yah saves. God saves. So there is a reality to these things, and it's being proven every day in quantum sciences, molecular science, genetic science. They keep bumping into the face of God all over the place. So that would be my closing comment, is remember that even when you look to science, seek first the presence of God, then measure and weigh your numbers that you see presented before you, and you might find some pretty amazing stuff within it.
Fascinating times that we live in. It's a wonderful discussion.
Really amazing times.
Yeah, it really is. And I want to just tell our viewers to please like this video, come to our YouTube channel and subscribe. And because we have well over 300 videos that we have posted there on all sorts of topics. We go in all directions, and you can find answers there by listening and re-listening to some of those messages. Our website is gracehealing.org. Gracehealing.video is a direct link to our YouTube, and we also have a Facebook page where we try to post on a weekly basis as well. And then Larry is reaching for the book that came out, A Covenant in Love, The Meaning of Life Revealed. Fantastic book. I read it a couple of times already, and it has actually a healing effect. Some people, just by touching the book and being with the book, had miraculous experiences and healings as well. So we'll invite you to be part of our community and reach out to Larry or Deborah or me, and we are here for you. So thank you so much for your time, and we will see you soon again.
It's a blessing to be here with you all.
Yeah.
Take care.